All right, so let's take a look at that wider binding, the one that's almost 5 inches. I'm going to fold this over. Again, just give this a little bit of a finger press. You can tug on that. I want to make sure that I've got those corners over nice and tight. And again, giving it a little bit of a press so that we don't have any gap there. I'm going to turn this over facing me so that, again, this is the back of my project where my binding is sewn down. I always sew the binding down on the front. That way the stitches, when we stitch in the ditch, will show on the back, not on the front. Now when I take my zip bind tool, again, it's adjusted much wider. When I place this on, groove side up, that slanted side here, that groove, you might be able to see from the front, there's a little bit of a shelf in there. That groove is where my binding is going to go. So again, straddle the tool with my pointer fingers and thumbs, and I'm going to pull back and pull forward. Now that binding's sitting in that groove tightly. So clue number 1, the binding sits tightly in the groove, but not so tight there's a pucker. Clue 2, the lock line should not show. As I slide that along, the lock line locks right into the ditch, and I've got that adjusted for the width of the binding. And that's how we would use this for wider binding. I like to do a wider binding for baby projects. If you do this out of those flannels that have the really great bright colors for babies, then that gives them a little bit of fabric to play with. The seam allowance that I used here, just as a reminder, is much wider, not 1/4 of an inch. That seam allowance is much wider. When I fold this over and I feel that batting right to the edge, I don't want to have that gap, it gives me a little bit more on the back. We'll talk specifically about stitching in the ditch. Right now we're just looking at adjusting the width of the zip bind tool for our binding that's a little bit wider. Next we'll take a look at a narrower binding.